The old man's trembling hands fumbled with his wallet, coins spilling across the convenience store floor as the impatient officer snickered. "Maybe it's time for the retirement home, Grandpa," the young cop remarked loudly, drawing uncomfortable glances from other customers as the elderly man's weathered face flushed with shame. No one stepped forward to help as he slowly bent down, joints creaking, to gather his scattered change until the sleeve of his worn jacket rolled back, revealing the faded ink that had marked his skin for over 5 decades. The officer's smug expression vanished instantly, his face draining of color as he stared at the simple word etched on the old man's forearm, Vietnam. The badge that had given him such authority suddenly felt heavy on his chest, but what the officer didn't know was that this wasn't just any veteran, and in exactly 47 minutes, a motorcade of military officials would arrive at that very store, looking specifically for the man he had just humiliated. Mason Quinn gathered the last penny from the floor, his weathered hand still steady enough despite the tremor that came and went. The young officer had already moved on, laughing with the cashier about something else entirely. It was as if the moment of humiliation had been nothing but a passing breeze to him, but to Mason it had been a gale-force wind that stripped away the careful anonymity he'd maintained for decades. He paid for his coffee and single pastry, nodding politely to the cashier, who couldn't quite meet his eyes now. The bell above the door jingled as he stepped outside into the crisp autumn air of Millfield, the small town he'd called home since returning from Southeast Asia 53 years ago. The walk home was exactly 18 blocks. Mason had counted them every day for the past 20 years since retiring from the post office. 18 blocks that gave him time to settle his mind, to push back the memories that threatened to surface whenever something pierced the careful shield he'd built around himself. Today, those 18 blocks felt longer. The officer's words echoed in his head, not because they were particularly cruel, Mason had heard worse, but because of what had followed, the sudden recognition, the fear. It was the first time in decades anyone had reacted to his tattoo that way. "You've gotten sloppy, old man," he muttered to himself, adjusting his jacket sleeve to ensure the marking was covered again. As he walked, the familiar storefronts of Millfield slid past. Donovan's Hardware, where he bought the same brand of nails every spring to repair his fence. The library with its faded blue awning, where Mrs. Abernathy still worked the desk at 78 and always set aside history books she thought he might enjoy. The diner where he ate breakfast every Sunday, always alone, always at the counter. No one knew him, not really, and that was by design. Mason turned onto Sycamore Street, where his modest one-story home sat 3 houses from the corner. The maple tree he'd planted 40 years ago now towered over the front yard, its leaves turning brilliant red with the changing season. His lawn was neat, his hedges trimmed precisely. Nothing drew attention, nothing suggested anything remarkable about the man who lived inside. Once through his front door, Mason hung his jacket on the wooden peg and moved directly to the kitchen. Out of habit, he checked that the doors were locked, the windows secured. Only then did he allow his shoulders to drop slightly, the tension easing from his frame. On the mantel in his sparse living room sat a wooden box, handcrafted from teak. Mason ran his fingers over its polished surface but didn't open it. He never opened it. Inside lay the physical reminders of a life he'd chosen to leave behind, of actions the government had deemed classified, of medals he'd refused to accept. Publicly, the phone on the wall caught his eye. He should call someone, report what had happened. The terms of his agreement had been clear: maintain anonymity, report any recognition. For 50 years there had been no need. Mason's hand hovered over the receiver before dropping back to his side. Not yet. Maybe it was nothing. Just a young cop startled by an old man's war tattoo. It happened occasionally with the younger generation who knew Vietnam only as history book chapters. He moved to his favorite chair by the window, the one that allowed him to see anyone approaching the house. From the side table, he picked up the latest library book, a history of the Cold War that got so many details wrong he'd nearly returned it unfinished. But reading kept his mind sharp, kept the memories at bay. As the afternoon light slanted through the blinds, Mason Quinn sat, very still, listening to the quiet of his empty house, wondering if today would be the day his past finally caught up with him. Officer James Reynolds slid back into the patrol car, tossing his convenience store coffee into the cup holder. His partner, Davis, glanced up from his phone. What took so long? Line for coffee that bad? Reynolds shrugged, turning the key in. The ignition. Just some old-timer holding everyone up. Coins everywhere, you know how it goes. But Reynolds couldn't shake the image of that tattoo. The way his own stomach had dropped when he saw it. Something about the old man's eyes had changed when Reynolds had laughed. Not anger, something deeper, recognition maybe, like the old man had seen right through him. "You look like you saw a ghost," Davis remarked, eyes back on his phone. "Nah, just ready to get through this shift." Reynolds pulled the cruiser back onto Main Street. "Got plans tonight. Tina's making that pasta thing," Davis snorted. "Domestic bliss. Meanwhile, I've got another blind date my sister set up. Girl. Who works at the bank. Probably another dud." The radio crackled. "All units in the vicinity of downtown Millfield. Be advised we have a bolo for a person of interest. Male, approximately 75-80 years old. White hair, possibly a Vietnam veteran. No warrant, non-threatening. Military personnel requesting information. Only." Reynolds felt a chill run down his spine. The description matched the old man from the store perfectly. Davis raised an eyebrow. "Well, that's specific. What did some old vet do? Steal classified denture adhesive?" "Unit 17 responding," Reynolds said into the radio, ignoring his partner's joke. "Possible visual on subject approximately 20 minutes ago at Miller's Corner Store on 5th and Main." The radio crackled again. "Unit 17, stand by for further instructions." Davis looked at Reynolds curiously. "That the old guy who dropped his change?" Reynolds nodded, turning the car around. "Yeah, Vietnam tat on his arm. Seemed like nobody special. Military? Looking for him? Weird. Maybe he's one of those guys who went AWOL back in the day. Still catching up to him." Davis whistled. "Can you imagine carrying that for 50 years? Reynolds didn't answer. Something told him this was different. They patrolled the streets around the convenience store for the next hour, looking for the old man, but found nothing. Reynolds found himself hoping they wouldn't spot him. The shame of their earlier interaction sat heavy in his chest. As their shift neared its end, the radio came to life again. All units returned to station for briefing. Military personnel on site. The station buzzed with unusual activity when they arrived. 2 black SUVs with government plates were parked in the reserved spaces, and Reynolds spotted men in suits talking with Captain Brennan in his office. "What the hell?" Davis muttered as they walked in. "This is about that old guy? Gotta be something bigger." Officer Mallory intercepted them at the desk. "Reynolds, Captain wants you. Conference room. Now." "Me? Why?" "You're the only one who's had eyes on the subject today. Get in there." Reynolds made his way to the conference room, straightening his uniform. Through the glass, he could see Captain Brennan, stone-faced, alongside 2 men in crisp military dress uniforms, with enough medals and ribbons to suggest serious rank. A third man in a dark suit stood by the window, back turned. Captain Brennan waved him in. "Officer Reynolds, these gentlemen are Colonel Harris and General Westfield from the Department of Defense, and Mr. Clark from the State Department." The man by the window turned, nodding curtly. "They need to hear exactly what happened during your encounter today." "Sir, I just saw an elderly man at the convenience store. He dropped some change. I may have made a comment." Reynolds swallowed hard, suddenly aware of how his behavior would sound to these men. "I noticed he had a Vietnam tattoo, that's all." "What exactly did he look like?" Colonel Harris asked, sliding a notepad across the table. "Every detail." As Reynolds described the old man, the military officers exchanged glances. General Westfield's expression darkened. "And you're certain about the tattoo? Just the word Vietnam? No unit designation?" "Yes, sir. Just Vietnam in faded blue ink. Right forearm." Mr. Clark spoke for the first time. "That's him, after all these years." The air in the room seemed to thicken. Reynolds felt like he'd stumbled into something much bigger than a routine shift, much bigger than a moment of discourtesy to an elderly veteran. "Officer Reynolds," Captain Brennan said quietly, "you're being temporarily reassigned to assist these gentlemen. Whatever you saw today, whatever you think you know, it stays in this room. Understood?" Reynolds nodded, a knot forming in his stomach. "Yes, sir, understood." The police station's records room smelled of old paper and industrial cleaner. Reynolds sat at a computer terminal while Captain Brennan accessed the secure database with his credentials. The military officers stood behind them, silent sentinels, casting long shadows in the fluorescent light. "We need everything you have on residents matching the description," Colonel Harris said. "Focus on anyone who's lived here 20-plus years. Tax records, vehicle registrations, property deeds, anything." Reynolds typed the search parameters, uncomfortable with the weight of their scrutiny. The system churned slowly, searching through decades of digital archives. "Millfield's population is only about 12,000, Reynolds said to break the silence. "But we've got a pretty high percentage of veterans. VFW Post is one of the biggest in the county." Mr. Clark, the State Department man, stepped closer. "Does this veteran attend local VFW meetings?" Reynolds shrugged. "I wouldn't know, sir." "He doesn't," General Westfield said with certainty. "If he's who we think he is, he's avoided any veteran associations for decades. decades. The search results appeared. 17 men matching the age and general description. Reynolds scrolled through the list, scanning the attached ID photos. Top, Colonel Harris said suddenly. Go back 2. Reynolds clicked back to a driver's license photo of a white-haired man with deep-set eyes. The name read Mason Quinn. That's not him, Reynolds said, studying the face. The man I saw was thinner, more. He searched for the word weathered. Keep going, General Westfield ordered. They went through all 17 records. None matched the man from the convenience store. Captain Brennan frowned. That's impossible. Everyone residing in Millfield would have some record. Not if he's deliberately staying off the grid, Mr. Clark murmured. Check property records from further back, 40, 50 years ago. Reynolds adjusted the search parameters, extending the time frame to 1960. This time, the system took nearly 10 minutes to complete its search. The results included several dozen names, many with the notation deceased beside them. There, Colonel Harris pointed at the screen. Property deed, 1972. Mason Quinn, 1423 Sycamore Street. Reynolds clicked on the entry. A much younger version of the man stared back from a grainy black and white photo, military discharge papers. His eyes were the same, deep-set, watchful, holding something back. That's him, Reynolds confirmed, the chill returning to his spine. But there's no current driver's license, no vehicle registration, nothing for decades. Property taxes? General Westfield asked. Captain Brennan took over the keyboard, accessing the tax database. Paid in cash every year, never late. He whistled softly. Who pays property taxes in cash these days? Someone who doesn't want a paper trail, Mr. Clark said. Someone who was told to disappear. Reynolds looked between the 3 visitors. With all due respect, who exactly is this guy? What did he do? The men exchanged glances before Colonel Harris nodded almost imperceptibly. Mason Quinn, General Westfield began, served with distinction in Vietnam. Special operations, though the unit designation remains classified. After his 3rd tour, he was recruited for additional service. Intelligence work, Captain Brennan asked. In a manner of speaking, Mr. Clark replied vaguely. Let's just say there are operations from that era that still remain sensitive. Mr. Quinn was instrumental in one such operation. Afterward, certain arrangements were made for his protection. His protection, or to keep him quiet? Reynolds asked, then immediately regretted his boldness. Surprisingly, Mr. Clark smiled thinly. Perceptive officer, sometimes the line between the two becomes rather blurred. General Westfield straightened his already impeccable uniform. Recently declassified documents have changed the situation. Mr. Quinn's service record has been re-evaluated. We're here to make things right. So he's not in trouble? Reynolds asked. Quite the contrary, Colonel Harris said. The nation owes him a debt that's 50 years overdue. Captain Brennan leaned back in his chair. And you need Reynolds because Officer Reynolds, Mr. Clark said, fixing him with a penetrating stare, has already made contact. Unfortunate as the circumstances were, he's now our best chance to approach Mr. Quinn without causing undue alarm. Reynolds felt the weight of their stares and something else, the heavy knowledge that he had mocked a man apparently important enough to bring high-ranking military officers to their small-town police station. There's more to this story, Colonel Harris said, gathering the printed records. Much more. But for now, we need to locate Mr. Quinn and make contact. I know where his house is, Reynolds said quietly. I can take you there. First, General Westfield said, we need to be absolutely certain this is our man. Tell me, Officer Reynolds, did you notice anything else about him? Any distinguishing features besides the tattoo? Reynolds thought back to the convenience store, to the old man gathering coins from the floor. His hands, he said finally. Despite the tremor, his movements were precise, deliberate. And when he looked at me after I laughed at him, it was like he was assessing a threat. The 3 visitors nodded in unison, seemingly satisfied. That's him, Mr. Clark said. That's our ghost. The evening ritual never changed. Mason Quinn set his small dining table with a single plate, a single fork, a single knife. Tonight's meal was simple. Canned soup warmed on the stove, half a sandwich, an apple sliced into perfect quarters. He ate methodically, each bite carefully chewed, eyes occasionally drifting to the window. The encounter at the store had disturbed his carefully maintained routine. That look in the officer's eyes, recognition, fear. It was the reason Mason had stayed in Millfield all these years. Small towns saw without truly looking. People became fixtures, unremarkable in their familiarity. But now someone had seen, really seen. After washing his dishes and placing them precisely in the drying rack, Mason moved to his sparse bedroom. From beneath the bed, he pulled out a metal lockbox, different from the wooden one on the mantel. This one held no medals or commendations, only memories he couldn't afford to forget. The key hung around his neck on a simple chain. He opened the box and removed a yellowed envelope, carefully extracting several photographs. Young men in jungle fatigues, arms slung around each other's shoulders, cigarettes dangling from smiling lips, boys playing at being warriors before they understood the cost. Mason's finger traced the faces. Johnson, dead 2 weeks after the photo was taken. Nguyen, their South Vietnamese interpreter, who'd saved them all at least twice. Captain Reeves, who'd hand-picked Mason for his special skill set. And Tran, the reason for everything that followed. The memories came whether he wanted them or not. The humid air of Saigon, thick with diesel fumes and cooking spices, the weight of his rifle, an extension of his arm, the constant vigilance that became as natural as breathing. Operation Stillwater. Even now, the code name sent a chill through his aging bones. It had begun as reconnaissance, monitoring Viet Cong movements near a suspected weapons cache. Mason's unit, 5 Americans and 2 South Vietnamese, had stumbled upon something much worse, a village, not on any official map. A massacre in progress. Mason closed his eyes, but the images played on like a film he couldn't stop. The shot, the screams, his team moving without orders, without hesitation, taking down the executioners with clinical precision, and then finding the children hidden in the underground bunker, terrified into silence. Among them was Tran, just 8 years old, clutching a stuffed animal sewn from rice sacks, his parents already dead in the dirt outside. "We have to report." "This," Johnson had said. Captain Reeves had been silent, calculating. "To who? Through which channels?" You know how command views these villages, VC sympathizers until proven otherwise. They'd argued through the night while Mason stood guard. With Nguyen, when dawn broke, their decision was made. They would escort the survivors, 14 children, 3 elderly women, 2 wounded men, to the nearest American base. Officially, they'd simply found refugees on the road, but someone had talked. Someone had revealed the unauthorized rescue. By the time they reached the base, military police were waiting. The children were processed as refugees. The adults interrogated for VC connections. Mason's unit was separated, debriefed for days. Then the men in suits arrived. Mason replaced. The photographs in the box kept one out. A small boy with solemn eyes, sitting on the lap of a smiling American nurse. On the back, in faded pencil, Tran, Operation Stillwater, 1968. The room felt suddenly colder. Mason listened to the night sounds of his small house. The refrigerators, the occasional car passing outside, the tick of the clock in the hallway. Normal sounds, safe sounds, until they weren't. A car slowed outside. Headlights swept across his living room wall through the thin curtains. Mason moved with surprising agility for a man his age, the old training asserting itself. From the window, he watched a police cruiser drive past, moving slowly, deliberately. They were looking for him. Mason tucked the photograph into his shirt pocket, then moved to the closet. Behind a row of neatly hung shirts was a small panel, invisible unless you knew to look for it. Inside was a passport, not in the name of Mason Quinn, and a sealed envelope with instructions he'd memorized decades ago. Emergency protocols established by men now long dead, but he hesitated. Running meant admitting there was something to run from, and Mason Quinn had been running for 50 years. No, whatever was coming, he would face it here, in the home he'd built, in the life he'd crafted from the ashes of another. He returned the passport and envelope to their hiding place, then sat in his chair by the window. Sleep wouldn't come tonight. It never did when the echoes of Saigon grew too loud. By dawn, the quiet streets of Millfield had become the center of a silent storm. 3 black SUVs now sat parked at the Millfield Inn, their government plates drawing curious glances from locals. At the police station, Captain Brennan had cleared the conference room, posting Officer Davis at the door with strict instructions to keep everyone out. Inside, Reynolds watched as Colonel Harris spread a detailed map of the town across the table. General Westfield was on his phone, speaking in hushed tones about extraction protocols and media containment. Mr. Clark from the State Department unpacked a laptop and established a secure connection to somewhere Reynolds suspected was far. Above his pay grade. "We move at 0900, Colonel Harris announced, circling Mason Quinn's address on the map. "Standard diplomatic approach. No tactical gear, no visible weapons. We don't want to spook him." Reynolds shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Sir, if I may, this level of a response seems extreme for notifying a veteran about declassified records." The 3 men exchanged glances before General Westfield sighed and set down his phone. "Officer Reynolds, what I'm about to tell you doesn't Leave this room. He leaned forward, voice lowered. Operation Stillwater wasn't just any mission. It exposed a joint CIA military black op that violated international agreements. Quinn and his unit intervened in something they weren't supposed to see, much less stop. They saved lives, Mr. Clark added, at a time when saving certain lives was politically inconvenient. Reynolds tried to process this. So Quinn was, what, punished for doing the right thing? Not officially, Colonel Harris said. The unit was disbanded, records sealed. Quinn was offered a choice: continue service in a classified capacity or accept an honorable discharge with certain conditions. He chose discharge, Mr. Clark continued. The conditions were strict. No contact with former unit members, no veteran. Organizations, no speaking about his service. Complete anonymity. For 50 years, Reynolds couldn't hide his disbelief. Just to cover up some mission gone wrong? It wasn't just the mission, General Westfield said quietly. It was what came after. The children they rescued, one in particular, turned out to be very significant. Before Reynolds could ask more, the door opened. Captain Brennan entered with a short, gray-haired man in wire-rimmed glasses. Gentlemen, this is Frank Dobson, commander of the local VFW post. Dobson nodded curtly. Captain says you're looking for a Vietnam vet in town, one who doesn't attend meeting. General Westfield straightened. That information is need to know, Mr. Dobson. With respect, General, Dobson replied, unfazed by the rank. I've known every vet in this town for 20 years. I might be able to help if you'd stop with the cloak and dagger routine. An uncomfortable silence fell before Colonel Harris nodded. We're looking for Mason Quinn, served 1966 to 1969. Special operation. Dobson's eyes widened slightly. The postal worker, keeps to himself, lives on Sycamore? That's him, Reynolds confirmed. Never joined the VFW, never came to any events, Dobson said thoughtfully. Always polite when I'd see him around town, but made it clear he didn't discuss his service. He paused. There were rumors, of course. Some of the older vets said he was CIA or some kind of special forces, but Quinn never confirmed anything. Has he had any visitors lately? Anyone unusual asking about him? Mr. Clark asked. Dobson shook his head. Not that I've heard, but he hesitated. But what? General Westfield pressed. About 6 months ago, 2 men came to a VFW meeting. Older. Fellows not from around here. They asked if anyone knew a Mason from the 5th Special Forces Group. When nobody did, they left. Never said why they were looking. The 3 government men exchanged alarmed glances. Were they military? Colonel Harris demanded. Former, I'd say. Had that bearing. One walked with a cane. Old injury, not age. I offered to take their information if this Mason ever turned up, but they declined. Mr. Clark was already typing rapidly on his laptop. I need descriptions, every detail you can remember. As Dobson described the visitors, Reynolds felt the tension in the room rise. Whatever Operation Stillwater had been, it clearly still mattered. To people in high places, outside the conference room, the station's usual morning bustle had begun. Through the glass, Reynolds saw Davis turn away several curious officers. Word was spreading that something big was happening. We need to move now, General Westfield said after Dobson finished. If others are looking for Quinn, our timeline is compromised. I'll take you to his house, Reynolds offered, standing. Colonel Harris nodded. You, me, and Mr. Clark. The general will coordinate from here. He turned to Captain Brennan. We'll need a secure perimeter around Quinn's property. No uniforms, no sirens. Plainclothes officers only. As they prepared to leave, Reynolds caught Mr. Clark checking a small handgun before concealing it inside his jacket. Is that really necessary? Reynolds asked quietly. Clark's expression remained neutral. Let's hope not. But Mason Quinn isn't the only ghost from Vietnam still walking around. The Millfield Historical Society occupied a converted Victorian house at the edge of the town square. Eleanor Whitman, the town historian for over 30 years, looked up in surprise as Reynolds entered with Colonel Harris and Mr. Clark. Officer. Reynolds, she greeted, adjusting her cat-eye glasses. Twice in 1 year. Must be a record. Reynolds managed to smile. Ms. Whitman, these gentlemen need information about a long-time resident. Government? She asked shrewdly, eyeing their suits, military archives, Colonel Harris answered smoothly, verifying service records for a benefits review. Eleanor didn't look convinced, but gestured toward her cluttered office. Who's the lucky veteran? Mason Quinn, Reynolds said. Lives on Sycamore Street. Eleanor's expression changed subtly. Interesting timing. Someone else was asking about him last month. Mr. Clark's attention sharpened. Who? A researcher. Said he was writing a book about postal workers who served in Vietnam. She shrugged. I didn't have much to share. Mr. Quinn has always been private. But you do have records on him? Colonel Harris pressed. Eleanor nodded slowly. Follow me. She led them to a back room lined with filing cabinets and acid-free storage. Boxes. A single computer sat on a desk covered with yellow yellowed newspaper clippings. Millfield Chronicle, September 1972, she said, pulling a binder from a shelf. First mention of Mason Quinn. The newspaper showed a small article about new Postal Service hires. Quinn's name appeared in a list, nothing more. He arrived that summer, Eleanor continued, rented a room at the boarding house on Elm for 6 months, then bought the house on Sycamore. Paid cash, according to town gossip. Any family? Mr. Clark asked. None that ever visited. No wife, no children. She pulled another binder. He did have one connection, though. Harold Winters, the previous postmaster. They served in Vietnam. Around the same time, Reynolds leaned forward. Were they friends? Colleagues, certainly. Harold passed away in '98, but they seemed to have an understanding. When the VFW tried to recruit Quinn, Harold intervened, said Quinn's service was complicated and he preferred privacy. Colonel Harris studied the newspaper clipping. Any unusual incidents involving Quinn over the years? Any pattern disruptions? Eleanor gave him a shrewd look. You're not from archives, are you, Colonel? He met her gaze without flinching. Ma'am, I assure you we're here with Mr. Quinn's best interests in mind. After a moment, she nodded and turned to a filing cabinet. 1987, a break-in at Quinn's house. Nothing taken according to the police report, but Quinn installed a security system the next day. Unusual for Millfield back then. She handed them a thin file, and in 1991, during the Gulf War, he took an unexpected 2-week leave from the Postal Service. No explanation given. Mr. Clark exchanged glances with Colonel Harris. Desert Storm timing. Interesting. Eleanor crossed her arms. I've been town historian since before Quinn arrived. I know when someone is deliberately leaving no footprints. She lowered her voice. Was he some kind of operative, witness protection? Ms. Whitman, Colonel Harris said carefully, what exactly do you know? Only what I observe. A man who arrived alone, lived alone, worked diligently but never advanced his career, despite obvious intelligence, who pays taxes in cash and avoids cameras, who reads history books about Southeast Asia but never discusses his time there. She paused. A man who flinches at car backfires but stood completely calm during the bank robbery in '83. Reynolds had never heard about a bank robbery involving Quinn. What happened? Armed robber took hostages. Quinn was cashing his paycheck. According to witnesses, when the gunman became agitated, Quinn talked him down, spoke to him in Vietnamese, convinced him to release the hostages before police arrived. That wasn't in any report, Reynolds said, because Quinn left before giving a statement. The bank president was a veteran himself, understood Quinn's desire for privacy. It was different time, Officer Reynolds. Mr. Clark had been taking notes. You said someone was researching him recently. Did this person leave a name? Contact information? Eleanor hesitated before retrieving a business card from her desk. I thought it was odd he used a card for historical research. The card bore no company name, just a name, Michael Tran, and a phone number with a Washington, D.C. area code. Mr. Clark's expression remained neutral, but Reynolds noticed his posture stiffen. When exactly did Mr. Tran visit? The colonel asked. 3 weeks ago. He was very interested in Quinn's early years in Millfield. Asked if Quinn had ever mentioned Operation Stillwater, she studied their reactions. The name meant nothing to me, but clearly it means something to you. Colonel Harris carefully pocketed the business card. Ms. Whitman, we'd appreciate your discretion regarding this conversation. Of course, she replied. But may I ask, is Mr. Quinn in some kind of trouble? Quite the opposite, Mr. Clark said. A wrong is finally being made right. As they prepared to leave, Eleanor called after them. Officer Reynolds, the day after that researcher visited, I saw Quinn at the cemetery, at Harold Winter's grave. First time I'd ever seen him there. He left dog tags on the headstone. Reynolds nodded his thanks for this final piece of information. Outside, as they walked back to the car, he asked the question that had been building. This Michael Tran, is he related to the boy from the village? Mr. Clark's step faltered slightly. You're connecting dots very quickly, officer. Am I right? Colonel Harris opened the car door. Tran wasn't just any child they rescued. His father had been a high-level South Vietnamese intelligence officer working with American forces. The documents he'd hidden in that village eventually helped save thousands of lives, and now his son is looking for the man who saved him, Reynolds said. Yes, Mr. Clark confirmed, but we need to reach Quinn first. There are still people who would prefer Operation Stillwater remain buried, along with everyone involved. Back at Miller's Corner store, a nervous young clerk named Tyler fidgeted behind the counter as Reynolds, Colonel Harris, and Mr. Clark reviewed the security footage. The small office behind the store smelled of cigarettes and coffee, despite the no smoking sign taped to the wall. That's him, Reynolds said, pointing pointing to the grainy image of Mason Quinn entering the store. 8:37 a.m. yesterday. They watched in silence as the scene unfolded. Quinn selecting his items, approaching the register, fumbling with his chain. Reynolds winced when he saw himself on screen. The dismissive laugh, the cutting remark about retirement homes. It looked even worse from this angle. "Stop there," Colonel Harris said suddenly. "Go back 5 seconds." Tyler rewound the footage. "What are we looking for?" When Quinn's sleeve rode up, "There," Mr. Clark pointed at the screen. "Freeze it." The image showed Quinn's exposed forearm with the Vietnam tattoo, but Mr. Clark was pointing at something else, a small scar just above. The wrist, circular in shape. "Cigarette burn," he said quietly. Interrogation marker. Colonel Harris nodded grimly. "VC technique. They'd mark high-value prisoners." Reynolds looked between them. "He was captured?" "Briefly," Colonel Harris replied. "His file says 3 days. He never spoke about what happened during those days." They continued watching the footage. After Reynolds' comment, Quinn had gathered his coins with careful precision, paid for his items, and left, his face betraying no emotion beyond a momentary flush of embarrassment. "Has he been coming here long?" Mr. Clark asked Tyler. The clerk nodded. "Mr. Quinn?" "Forever, since before I started working here 4 years ago. Comes in every Tuesday and Friday, like clockwork. Coffee and a pastry. Sometimes a newspaper." "Always alone?" Reynolds asked. "Yeah, keeps to himself. Super polite, though. Please and thank you. Exact change when he can manage it." Tyler hesitated. "Never seen anyone disrespect him like that before?" "No offense, officer." Reynolds accepted the deserved criticism with a nod. "Does he ever talk about himself? His past?" "Nah. Weather, sometimes baseball. Once helped me with a history paper about Vietnam. Recommended some books, that's it." Tyler leaned forward. "Is he in trouble? Because Mr. Quinn's like the most law-abiding dude I know." "No trouble," Colonel Harris assured him. "Just following up on some long-overdue recognition." Tyler's expression brightened. "Like a medal or something? That's cool. He seems like he was probably a badass back in the day, you know? Has that look?" "What look?" Mr. Clark asked. "Like he sees everything. My grandpa was Special Forces. Had the same vibe. Eyes always checking exits. Never. Sits with his back to the door." Tyler shrugged. "Military stuff, I guess." Reynolds thought about his own brief interaction with Quinn, that moment of assessment when their eyes had met, not anger, but calculation. The instincts of a man trained to evaluate threats even half a century later. "One more thing," Reynolds said. "Does Quinn ever use a credit card, cell phone, anything electronic?" Tyler shook his head. "Cash only. Never seen him with a phone. Old school all the way." As they prepared to leave, Tyler called after them. "Hey, when you see Mr. Quinn, tell him Tyler says the Red Sox still have a chance this season. It's our little joke." Outside in the parking lot, Reynolds checked his watch. Nearly 8:30 a.m. Quinn's house is about 20 minutes from here on foot. If he keeps to his routine, he should be home. Mr. Clark was on his phone, speaking quietly. "Tran's number is active in Millfield. Cell tower ping puts him within 3 miles of our location." He ended the call. "We need to move. Now." "You still haven't told me what happens when we find Quinn," Reynolds said, as they got into the car. "What exactly are you offering him after all these years?" Colonel Harris started the engine. "Recognition. His unit is being awarded the Presidential Unit Citation, posthumously for most members, and the individual who specifically requested." "This review of Operation Stillwater," Mr. Clark added, "has expressed interest in meeting Mr. Quinn personally." "Who?" Reynolds asked. "The current National Security Advisor," Colonel Harris replied. "Michael Tran." Reynolds processed this. "The boy from the village is now the National Security Advisor, and he's here in Millfield looking for Quinn?" "Not officially," Mr. Clark cautioned. "The State Department has no record of his travel here. If he's in town, he's here as a private citizen, off the books." "Why all the secrecy after 50 years?" Reynolds asked. "The war's long over." "Some wars never end, Officer Reynolds," Colonel Harris said grimly, "and some operations remain sensitive despite the passage of time. Operation Stillwater revealed corruption at the highest levels of military and intelligence leadership during Vietnam. People willing to sacrifice civilians for political convenience. Most of those people are dead now," Mr. Clark added, "but their protégés, their institutions, those remain. There are still individuals who would prefer this particular chapter of history remain closed." As they turned onto Sycamore Street, Reynolds noticed a dark sedan parked 2 houses down from Quinn's address. Colonel Harris saw it too, his posture immediately tensing. "Government plates?" he said quietly. "But not ours." Mr. Clark drew his phone again. "I'll alert the general." Reynolds felt the situation shifting, becoming something beyond a simple recognition ceremony for an aging veteran. "Should we call for backup?" "No," Colonel Harris said, parking at the corner. "Too many people will only escalate the situation. expression. "We approach carefully. Remember, Quinn was special operations. Despite his age, don't underestimate him." As they exited the car, Reynolds noticed the curtain in Quinn's front window move slightly. The old soldier was watching, aware of their arrival and of the others. Mason Quinn stood in his living room, watching through a narrow gap in the curtains as the three men approached his front walk. The young officer from the convenience store, a military man, colonel by the insignia, and a third in a suit, intelligent, without question. Quinn recognized the type. Even after all these years, his hand moved instinctively to his pocket, touching the photograph of Tran. So they'd finally come. After 50 years of silence, of careful anonymity, the past had arrived. On his doorstep, the wooden box on the mantel seemed to grow heavier with each passing second. Quinn hadn't opened it in decades, hadn't needed the physical reminders of what he'd done, what he'd seen. The memories themselves were burdened enough. A firm knock at the door. Quinn straightened his shirt, ran a hand through his white hair, and took a steadying breath. Whatever came next, he would face it with the same quiet dignity that had carried him through half a century of secrets. He opened the door. "Mr. Quinn," the colonel said, "I'm Colonel James Harris, United States Army. This is Mr. Richard Clark from the State Department, and I believe you've already met Officer Reynolds of the Millfield Police." Reynolds had the good grace to look uncomfortable. "Mr. Quinn." Quinn studied each face in turn, his expression revealing nothing. "Gentlemen, I've been expecting you." If this surprised them, they didn't show it. Colonel Harris nodded. "May we come in?" Quinn stepped aside, gesturing them into his modest living room. No one sat. The air hung heavy with unspoken history. "Operation Stillwater," Quinn said finally, breaking the silence. "That's why you're here." "Yes, sir," Colonel Harris confirmed. "The records have been declassified." Quinn's gaze shifted to the window, toward the sedan down the street. "And the others? Who were they?" Mr. Clark followed his line of sight. "We're not certain yet, but they're not with us." "CIA?" Quinn asked. "Possibly," Mr. Clark admitted. "There are still elements within various agencies uncomfortable with full disclosure of certain Vietnam-era operations." Quinn nodded, unsurprised. "I've been waiting for 50 years, he said quietly. "At first, every knock, every unfamiliar car, I thought, this is it. After a decade, I stopped expecting it. After 2, I almost convinced myself it was truly over." "Sir," Reynolds spoke up, "I want to apologize for yesterday. I had no idea who you were, but that's no excuse for disrespect." Quinn regarded him with the same calm assessment he'd shown at the store. "You're not the first to see an old man instead of a soldier, son. Probably won't be the last." Colonel Harris stepped forward. "Mr. Quinn, I've been authorized to inform you that your unit is being awarded the Presidential Unit Citation for actions during Operation Stillwater. The ceremony is scheduled for next month at the White House." Quinn's expression didn't change. "A bit late, Colonel. Most of my unit is dead. Captain Reeves passed in 2012, Mr. Clark confirmed. Johnson in 83. Nguyen returned to Vietnam after the war, fate unknown." "Williams?" Quinn asked. "Still alive, living in Oregon. He's been notified." Quinn moved to the window again, scanning the street with practiced vigilance. "And Tran, the boy?" A moment of silence before Colonel Harris answered. "He's here, Mr. Quinn, in Millfield." For the first time, Quinn's composure faltered, a slight tremor in his hand, quickly controlled. "Here? After all this time?" "Michael Tran is now the National Security Advisor to the President," Mr. Clark explained. "He initiated the review that led to declassification. He's been looking for you." Quinn turned away, moving to the mantel where the wooden box sat. His fingers traced its polished surface. "I never knew what happened to those children. The terms of my agreement. No contact, no inquiries." "Tran was adopted by an American diplomatic family," Colonel Harris said. "Educated at Yale, served in the State Department, then the NSC. His father's documents proved invaluable to American intelligence." "Documents?" Reynolds asked. Quinn nodded slowly. Nguyen Tran, the boy's father, was South Vietnamese intelligence. He'd been embedded with the Viet Cong, gathering intelligence on North Vietnamese supply line. When his cover was compromised, he hid his intelligence in the village with his son. Quinn's voice grew distant. "He died trying to protect those villagers?" "His son wants to thank you personally," Mr. Clark said. "He remembers what you did." Quinn shook his head. "I was just doing my job." "You disobeyed direct orders," Colonel Harris countered. "Your unit risked court-martial to save those civilians. That goes beyond duty." Quinn finally opened the wooden box, revealing a collection of medals, ribbons, and photographs. One photograph showed 5 young soldiers and 2 Vietnamese men standing before a helicopter. Quinn touched the faces gently. "We couldn't leave them to die," he said simply. Orders or no orders, Reynolds watched this quiet veteran, so different from the embarrassed old man in the convenience store, and felt a deepening shame for his his earlier behavior. "Sir," he said, "the sedan has moved. It's coming this way." Mr. Clark moved to the window. Black Suburban, government plates. Colonel Harris reached for his phone, but Quinn held up a hand. "It's all right," he said with certainty. "I know who it is." The vehicle stopped directly in front of Quinn's house. The back door opened, and a distinguished Asian American man in his 60s emerged, straightening his suit jacket. "Tran," Quinn whispered, a lifetime of emotion contained in that single syllable. Colonel Harris looked to Quinn. "Are you ready for this, sir?" Mason Quinn squared his shoulders, standing straighter than he had in years. "I've been ready for 50 years, Colonel." Another knock at the door. This time, when Quinn moved to answer it, he walked with the unmistakable bearing of a soldier. The moment the door opened, time seemed to collapse. Reynolds watched as Quinn and Tran stood face to face, separated by 50 years yet connected by a single defining moment. Neither man spoke. Then, with formal dignity, Tran extended his hand. "Sergeant Quinn," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eye. "It has been a long time." Quinn took the offered hand. "You were 8 years old, holding a stuffed tiger." A smile broke across Tran's face. "You remember. I never forgot." The reunion moved inside, away from curious neighbors and potential observers. Quinn's modest living room now hosted the National Security Advisor, 3 government officials, and a small-town police officer, an unlikely gathering that spoke volumes about Operation Stillwater's significance. Tran carried a leather briefcase, which he placed carefully on Quinn's coffee table. "I've brought something that belongs to you, Sergeant." "Mason, please," Quinn said. "I haven't been Sergeant Quinn since 1969. Tran nodded and opened the briefcase, removing a sealed folder stamped with "Declassified" in bold red letters. "Your service record. The complete version, not the redacted one that's been in your file all these years." Quinn made no move to take it. "Why now? After all this time?" "Politics," Mr. Clark said bluntly. "Until recently, there were still powerful people who preferred Operation Stillwater remain buried, and now those people are gone," Tran added, "or their influence has waned enough that the truth can finally emerge." Colonel Harris stepped forward. "Mr. Quinn, with your permission, I'd like Officer Reynolds to hear the full story. He's been involved now, and he should understand exactly what happened." Quinn considered Reynolds for a moment, then nodded slowly. "The young should know what the old try to hide." Tran opened the folder and began to read. "Operation Stillwater, November 14th, 1968. Special reconnaissance mission near the Cambodian border. Unit commanded by Captain Robert Reeves, including Sergeant Mason Quinn, Corporals David Johnson and Eric Williams, with South Vietnamese interpreters Nguyen Loc and Private First Class Tran Van Min." Reynolds noticed Quinn's slight flinch at the names. "Mission parameters: locate suspected weapons cache, document Viet Cong movements, avoid engagement." Instead, they discovered a massacre in progress at an unmapped village. 14 enemy combatants executing civilians, primarily women, children, and elderly men. Tran paused, his professional demeanor slipping momentarily. "My village, my people," Quinn spoke softly. "Your father had already been killed when we arrived. He died trying to warn the village." Tran nodded, collecting himself. Without waiting for orders, Quinn's unit engaged the enemy forces, neutralizing the threat. They discovered 23 survivors, including 17 children hidden in an underground bunker. Among the children was myself, son of a South Vietnamese intelligence operative. He turned a page in the file. Captain Reeves reported finding refugees on the road, making no mention of the village or the engagement. However, upon return to base, an informant revealed the truth. The unit was separated and interrogated. 3 days, Quinn said distantly. "They questioned us for 3 days. The problem," Mr. Clark interjected, "was that the massacre wasn't being carried out by Viet Cong. The men were part of a black operations unit, Phoenix program adjacent, eliminating villages suspected of harboring intelligence operative." Reynolds struggled to understand. "Our own people were killing civilians?" "A rogue element," Colonel Harris clarified, "operating outside official channels but with protection from certain high-ranking officials. They claimed they were preventing intelligence leaks," Quinn said bitterly. "In reality, they were covering up a side operation, weapon sales, drug trafficking. My father had evidence," Tran continued, "documents detailing names, dates, operations. He hid them before they killed him. I was protecting those documents when Sergeant Quinn found me." Quinn's eyes met Tran's. "You wouldn't let go of that stuffed tiger." "The papers were sewn inside," Tran confirmed. "My father's final mission." Colonel Harris took up the narrative. "After the interrogation, the unit was given a choice: accept reassignment to separate posts under a gag order, order or face court-martial for disobeying orders and compromising a classified operation. We chose reassignment, Quinn said, with one condition: the children would be protected, evacuated, safely, which they were, Tran acknowledged. I was sent to Saigon, then to the States, adopted by a diplomatic family. The others went to various orphanages, refugee programs. And the men who ordered the massacre? Reynolds asked. Mr. Clark's expression darkened. Some were quietly removed from command. Others were too powerful, too connected. They continued their careers, eventually retiring with honors. Until now, Tran said, removing another document from his briefcase. This is the official Presidential Unit citation for exceptional heroism in action. It acknowledges that your unit saved 23 civilians and recovered intelligence that prevented further civilian casualties. Quinn accepted the document with steady hand. Williams should be here for this. He will be, Colonel Harris assured him, at the White House ceremony, along with Johnson's widow and Nguyen Loc's son. Loc survived? Quinn asked, surprise evident in his voice. Tran nodded. Returned to Vietnam after the war, worked with reconciliation efforts, passed away in 2011. For a moment, the room fell silent. Reynolds watched Quinn absorb this information. Pieces of a past suddenly made whole after decades of enforced silence. There's more, Tran said finally. Your Silver Star. It was approved but never awarded due to the classified nature of the operation. The president would like to present it personally, along with the unit citation. Quinn shook his head. I don't need medals. It's not about need, Tran said gently. It's about recognition, truth, setting the record straight. Quinn looked down at the declassified file, the official record of what had been the defining moment of his life. And those who tried to bury the truth? What happens to them? History will judge them, Tran said simply, as it should. Reynolds watched as Quinn's weathered hand touched the file, decades of secrecy finally broken. In that moment, the officer saw not the fumbling old man from the convenience store, but a soldier who had chosen right over orders, mercy over expediency, and paid for that choice with 50 years of silence. The rumble of engines drew everyone's attention to the window. Two more vehicles had pulled up outside Quinn's house, a black SUV similar to Tran's, and behind it, an older model pickup truck with Oregon plate. Right on time, Colonel Harris said, checking his watch. I told Williams to wait for my signal, but he was never one for following orders. Quinn moved to the window, his composure faltering as he recognized the elderly man, carefully descending from the passenger side of the pickup. Eric? After 50 years of enforced separation, the last two surviving American members of Operation Stillwater were about to reunite. Reynolds opened the front door as Quinn seemed momentarily frozen in place. The man from the pickup, Eric Williams, was tall and lean, his white hair cropped short in a military style that had likely never changed. He walked with a cane, favoring his right leg, but his back remained ramrod straight. Beside him walked a younger man who bore a striking resemblance, a son, most likely, supporting his father's elbow with gentle deference. When Williams reached the porch, he stopped, eyes finding Quinn in the doorway. For a long moment, neither veteran spoke, each taking in the changes 50 years had carved into once familiar faces. Then, Williams broke into a wide grin. Damn, Quinn, you got old. Quinn's solemn expression cracked. Look who's talking. At least, I can still walk without a stick. Shrapnel in 71, Williams explained, tapping his right thigh. My souvenir from that third tour you were smart enough to avoid. The formality between them dissolved in an instant. Quinn stepped forward, and the two men embraced, a quick, fierce hug that spoke of brotherhood, deeper than blood. Never thought I'd see you again, Quinn said, his voice rough with emotion. They made us promise, Williams agreed. But I figured after 50 years, what are they going to do? Court-martial a couple of old men? They moved inside, Williams introducing his son James, named after a mutual friend they'd lost at Khe Sanh. Tran stepped forward, extending his hand to Williams. Corporal Williams, you may not remember me, but the boy with the tiger, Williams interrupted, clasping Tran's hand in both of his own. Of course I remember. You've done well for yourself, son. National Security Advisor. Your father would be proud. Tran's professional demeanor softened. Thank you. That means a great deal. As they settled in Quinn's suddenly crowded living room, Reynolds observed the subtle ways the veterans positioned themselves, backs to walls, clear sightlines to exits. Half a century later, their training remained ingrained. When they called, me, Williams said, gesturing to Colonel Harris, Harris. I couldn't believe it. After all this time, they finally decided to acknowledge what happened. He shook his head. Too late for Reeves, too late for Johnson. Robert's buried at Arlington, Quinn said. I checked once, about 20 years ago. Couldn't attend the funeral, of course. The terms of the agreement, Williams nodded. No contact with unit members. No veteran organizations. No talking about Vietnam. He looked around the modest home. You've been living like this all these years, completely cut off. It was easier, Quinn admitted. Fewer questions to dodge. Williams turned to his son. James, show them what we brought. The younger Williams retrieved a worn leather case from the truck. Inside was a collection of photographs, carefully preserved in plastic sleeves. The unit in Vietnam. Young men with haunted eyes and forced smiles. I wasn't supposed to keep these, Williams explained, but I couldn't let them erase everything. Quinn studied the images like sacred text, touching the faces of men long gone. Johnson's smile, always smiling, even in the worst places. Remember that night outside Da Nang, Williams asked, when he traded his last cigarettes for that bottle of God knows what, and we all got so sick Reeves had us running drills at dawn anyway? For the first time, Reynolds saw Quinn laugh, a genuine, unguarded moment of remembrance. Reeves said, if we were well enough to drink, we were well enough to run. The two veterans fell into reminiscence, trading stories that had remained locked away for decades. Reynolds noticed how carefully they navigated around Operation Stillwater itself, the wound still too raw. Even now, Tran watched the exchange with profound attention, occasionally asking questions about the men in the photographs, his father's unexpected allies, who had risked everything to save a village deemed expendable by their own command. There's someone else who wants to see you, Williams said eventually. Couldn't make the trip, but sent this. He handed Quinn a sealed envelope. Inside was a letter and a faded photograph of a Vietnamese man in middle age, standing with his family before a simple home. Nguyen Loc, Quinn breathed. He made it home. Went back after the fall of Saigon, Williams confirmed. Worked as a teacher. His son found me 5 years ago through one of those Vietnam veteran websites. By then Loc had passed, but his son wanted me to have this. The photograph showed Loc's extended family, children and grandchildren, who existed because of what? Quinn's unit had done that day in 1968. 23 survivors, Tran said softly. Now over 100 descendants. A village reborn. Quinn carefully returned the photograph to its envelope, his hands steadier than they'd been in years. Reynolds realized what he was witnessing, a soldier reclaiming pieces of himself long surrendered to secrecy and obligation. We did the right thing, Williams said firmly. No matter what it cost us, Quinn nodded. We did. Outside, more cars were arriving. General Westfield, Captain Brennan, and other officials drawn to this unexpected gathering. But inside Quinn's modest home, time had collapsed into a sacred space where only truth existed. The truth of what 5 young men had done when faced with an impossible choice. A truth finally acknowledged after 50 years of silence. News traveled fast in Millfield. By noon, the unusual gathering at Mason Quinn's modest home had become the talk of the town. The presence of government vehicles with blacked-out windows and the arrival of strangers in suits triggered a cascade of speculation that rippled through diners, shops, and social media. At the Millfield Diner, Eleanor Whitman held court at her usual table, fielding questions from curious locals while carefully revealing nothing of substance about her earlier conversation with Reynolds and the military. Officials, all I know, she told Harriet Jensen, the diner's owner, is that Mason Quinn deserves whatever recognition he's finally receiving. Across town, Tyler from Miller's Corner Store was less discreet. Secret military mission, he told anyone who would listen. Quinn was some kind of special forces hero. I always knew it, the way he carries himself, you know. By early afternoon, a small crowd had gathered at the end of Sycamore Street, kept at a respectful distance by 2 Millfield police officers. Among the onlookers was Frank Dobson from the VFW, who arrived with 3 elderly veterans, each wearing caps identifying their service. I tried to get Quinn to join for 20 years, Dobson told Officer Davis, who had been assigned to crowd control. All was politely declined. Now I understand why. Inside Quinn's home, Reynolds watched through the window as the gathering outside grew. Word spreading, he informed Colonel Harris. Might want to consider how to handle this. Harris nodded. General Westfield is coordinating with your captain. We'll need to make a statement soon. Quinn, who had been deep in conversation with Williams and Tran, looked up. Statement? About what? About you, Mr. Clark said. Your service, the unit citation, the upcoming ceremony at the White House. It's going to become public knowledge very quickly. Quinn frowned. I don't want a spectacle. smile. I've spent 50 years avoiding attention. It's too late for that, Williams said gently. Look outside, Mason. The world's finally ready to hear the truth. A knock at the door interrupted them. Reynolds opened it to find Mayor Patricia Green on the doorstep, her expression a mixture of confusion and determination. Officer Reynolds, she said, Captain Brennan tells me we have distinguished visitors in town, including the National Security Advisor, and that they're all gathered in Mason Quinn's living room. She peered past him. I think I'm owed an explanation. Colonel E.A. Harris stepped forward. Mayor Green, I'm Colonel Harris, United States Army. This is a matter of national recognition for one of your citizens. If you'll give us some time. Patricia, Quinn interrupted, moving to the door. It's all right. Please come in. The mayor's professional demeanor softened as she addressed Quinn directly. Mason, we've known each other for what, 30 years? Since I was a teller at First National, and you came in every Friday to cash your postal service check. Quinn nodded. 32 years. In all that time, you never once mentioned you were a war hero. I'm not a hero, Quinn said automatically. I just did what needed doing. Tran stepped forward. Mayor Green, I'm Michael Tran. Because of what? Mason Quinn and his unit did in 1968. 23 lives were saved, including mine. The United States government is finally acknowledging their heroism after decades of silence due to the classified nature of their mission. Mayor Green absorbed this information with the practiced poise of a career politician. I see. And these proceedings are happening in our town because this is my home, Quinn said simply. Something in his tone seemed to satisfy her. Well then, she said, straightening her jacket, Millfield should respond accordingly. Mr. Quinn has been a model citizen for decades. If he's receiving national recognition, we should support that. She turned to Colonel Harris. What do you need from the town? As they discussed logistics, Reynolds noticed Quinn slip away to the kitchen. He followed, finding the elderly veteran, staring out the back window at his carefully maintained garden. Overwhelming? Reynolds asked. Quinn nodded. 50 years of hiding who I am, what I did. Now suddenly it's going to be in the newspaper. For what it's worth, Reynolds said, I think people will be proud. This town respects its veterans. It's not about pride, Quinn replied. It's about privacy. Peace. I made my peace with what happened long ago. I don't need parades. Before Reynolds could respond, his radio crackled. Davis's voice came through. Reynolds, we've got media arriving. Local news van from Springfield just pulled up. Quinn closed his eyes briefly, and so it begins. Back in the living room, the atmosphere had shifted to one of planning and coordination. Mayor Green was on her phone, speaking to the town council. Williams and his son were examining a calendar, discussing travel arrangements to Washington. Tran was conferring with Mr. Clark about security protocols. General Westfield, who had arrived during the mayor's visit, approached Quinn as he returned from the kitchen. Mr. Quinn, I understand your desire for privacy, but after 50 years, perhaps the truth deserves its day in the light. The truth, Quinn said quietly, is that we disobeyed orders, broke rules. Some would call it insubordination. Others would call it moral courage, Westfield countered. The kind we try to instill in every soldier, but rarely test so severely. Outside, the crowd had grown. Reynolds could see Tyler from the convenience store, now wearing an American flag t-shirt. Eleanor Whitman had arrived with an armful of folders, historical, records no doubt. Several veterans from the VFW stood at attention when Quinn glanced out the window. Your neighbors, Tran observed. They want to honor you. Quinn shook his head. They don't even know me. They know enough, Williams said. They know you're a man who keeps his word, who lives with dignity, who carries himself with honor. The Tartusic details don't matter. As the afternoon sun slanted through the windows, casting long shadows across the floor of the modest home, Mason Quinn, postal worker, solitary neighbor, keeper of secrets, faced the end of 50 years of anonymity. The carefully constructed walls between his past and present were crumbling, and nothing would ever be the same. Reynolds watched the realization dawn in Quinn's eyes, not fear, not even resignation, but something like acceptance. The weight of secrets finally lifted from shoulders that had carried them far too long. As evening approached, Quinn's house gradually emptied. Mayor Green left to arrange a town hall meeting. Colonel Harris and General Westfield departed to coordinate security with local police. Tran had gone to make phone calls, maintaining the necessary discretion his position required. Williams Holmes and his son retired to the Millfield Inn, promising to return in the morning. The sudden quiet felt almost as jarring as the earlier commotion. Quinn moved through his living room, straightening cushions and gathering coffee cups with the precise movements of a man accustomed to order. "Let me help with that," Reynolds offered, collecting cups from the side tables. Quinn nodded his thanks, and the two men worked in companionable silence until the room was restored to its former neatness. Only the declassified file on the coffee table remained out of place, a piece of the past intruding on Quinn's carefully maintained present. "You don't have to stay, Officer Reynolds," Quinn said finally. "I'm sure you have duties elsewhere." Reynolds hesitated. "Actually, sir, if you don't mind, there's something I'd like to say." Quinn studied him for a moment, then gestured to a chair. "Please." Reynolds remained standing, removing his cap and holding it between his hands. "Mr. Quinn, about yesterday at the store—" "Already forgotten," Quinn interrupted. "No, sir, it shouldn't be." Reynolds met the older man's gaze directly. "What I said, how I behaved, it was disrespectful. Not just to you as a veteran, but as a person." Quinn's expression softened slightly. "You didn't know who I was." "That's just it, sir. It shouldn't matter who you were or what you did 50 years ago. No one deserves to be mocked for struggling with something as simple as paying for coffee." Reynolds twisted his cap in his hand. "My grandfather was a Vietnam vet, 101st Airborne. He died when I was 15. If someone had spoken to him the way I spoke to you, you'd have been right to be angry." Quinn finished for him. "But we all make mistakes, son. The measure of a man isn't avoiding them, it's how he makes them right." Reynolds nodded, accepting the wisdom. "Still, I want you to know I'm truly sorry." Apology accepted. Quinn moved to his kitchen. "Would you like some coffee?" "Real coffee, not that convenience store stuff." Reynolds smiled. "Yes, sir, that would be nice." As Quinn prepared the coffee with methodical precision, Reynolds noticed photographs on the refrigerator. Not personal ones, but scenic views of mountains, forests, and lake. "Held by Simple Magnet. Places you visited?" he asked. Quinn glanced at the photos. "Places I planned to visit after retirement. Never quite got around to it." "Why not?" Quinn handed him a steaming mug. "Habits. After so many years of staying put, of being careful, it becomes who you are." He shrugged. "Or perhaps I was waiting for something to be resolved." They moved to the small kitchen table by the window. Outside, the media vans had finally departed, though a few curious neighbors still lingered at the end of the street. "Can I ask you something, sir?" Reynolds said after a moment. "You don't have to answer." Quinn nodded. "All those years of silence, of isolation, was it worth it to protect the truth about Operation Stillwater?" Quinn considered the question, his weathered hands cradling his coffee mug. "I didn't see it as protecting the truth. I was protecting people, the survivors, my fellow soldiers, even those higher up who'd made terrible decisions. Exposing it all back then wouldn't have helped anyone." He paused. "But there were costs, connections never made, a full life never quite lived." "You seem to have made a good life here," Reynolds observed. "A quiet one," Quinn corrected. "There's a difference." They drank their coffee as darkness fell outside. Street lights flickered on, casting pools of yellow light on the sidewalk. "I joined the police because I wanted to protect people," Reynolds said suddenly. "Make a difference in my community. But most days it's just tickets and paperwork and telling kids to turn down their music." He shook his head. "Nothing like the choice you face." "Every day brings choices," Quinn said. "Some just have more immediate consequences than others." He studied the young officer. "Your moment will come. The question is whether you'll recognize it when it does." Reynolds nodded, understanding the deeper meaning in the veteran's words. "What happens now? After all this recognition, the ceremony? Will you stay in Millfield?" "Where else would I go?" Quinn asked. "This is home. The only one I've known since coming back." He glanced around his kitchen. "Though I suspect it won't be quite the same. Anonymity has its advantages. The town will respect your privacy," Reynolds said, "once the excitement dies down." Quinn smiled faintly. "Perhaps. Or perhaps it's finally time to step out of the shadows. Join that VFW Dobson's been inviting me to for decades. Share some stories that can now be told." As they finished their coffee, Quinn reached into his pocket and removed the photograph of young Tran. He was just a boy, frightened, alone, his father dead, his world destroyed. But even then, there was something in his eyes, determination, purpose. He handed the photo to Reynolds. "We make choices based on what's in front of us, officer, not for recognition or reward, just because it's right." Reynolds looked at the faded image, a child who would grow up to become one of the most powerful advisors in the country, because 5 soldiers had made a choice that defied their orders. "Thank you for the coffee, sir," Reynolds said, rising to leave, and the conversation. Quinn walked him to the door. "One more thing, Officer Reynolds." "Yes, sir." "When you see someone struggling, an old man dropping his change, a mother with too many packages, anyone having a difficult moment, remember that everyone is fighting battles you know nothing about. Kindness costs nothing, but its absence leaves marks. Reynolds nodded, the lesson landing deeper than any reprimand could have. I'll remember. As he walked to his patrol car, Reynolds looked back at Quinn's house. Modest, unassuming, much like the man himself. Inside was a hero who had never sought recognition, who had carried his burden quietly for 50 years. Tomorrow, Millfield would celebrate him. Tonight, he sat alone with memories finally allowed into the light. The Millfield Town Hall buzzed with activity the following morning. Mayor Green had called an emergency meeting of the town council, and by 9 o'clock, the usually sleepy chamber was filled to capacity. Frank Dobson and the VFW members occupied the front row, each wearing their formal caps. Eleanor Whitman had set up a small display of historical documents in the lobby. Local business owners, curious residents, and 2 reporters from regional newspapers filled the remaining seats. Ladies and gentlemen, Mayor Green began, as many of you have heard, our town has received some distinguished visitors. Today, I'm honored to announce that one of our own citizens, Mason Quinn, is being recognized by the United States government for extraordinary service during the Vietnam War. A murmur ran through the crowd. Most knew Quinn as the quiet, retired postal worker who kept his lawn immaculate and always nodded politely on his daily walk. The details of Mr. Quinn's service have been classified until now, the mayor continued, but Colonel Harris from the United States Army is here to share what can now be made public. Colonel Harris approached the podium with military precision. Thank you, Mayor Green. Citizens of Millfield, for over 50 years, Mason Quinn has lived among you, honoring a commitment to secrecy regarding a mission that saved 23 lives and provided crucial intelligence during the Vietnam conflict. As he outlined the basics of Operation Stillwater, carefully omitting the more sensitive aspects, Reynolds watched the audience from his position near the door. Faces registered surprise, then respect, then something deeper, a collective recognition of the quiet hero who had walked unacknowledged among them for decades. Quinn himself was notably absent. He had declined the mayor's invitation, preferring to meet privately with Williams and Tran at his home. When Colonel Harris finished, Frank Dobson stood. The VFW would like to propose an immediate recognition ceremony, something dignified, befitting Sergeant Quinn's service. Mayor Green nodded. I believe we can arrange something appropriate before Mr. Quinn leaves for the White House ceremony next month. What followed was a passionate but respectful debate about how best to honor a man who had spent half a century avoiding attention. Suggestions ranged from a parade, quickly dismissed as too ostentatious for Quinn's taste, to renaming the post office where he had worked, deemed too bureaucratically complex for immediate action. Perhaps, Eleanor Whitman suggested, we should ask Mr. Quinn what he would consider appropriate. This sensible proposal was unanimously approved. Mayor Green appointed a small committee, Dobson, Eleanor, and Reynolds, to approach Quinn with the town's intentions. After the meeting adjourned, Reynolds found himself surrounded by townspeople, eager for more information about the man they thought they'd known. Did you know? Tyler from the convenience store asked. When you saw his tattoo? No, Reynolds admitted. I had no idea. Just goes to show, an elderly woman remarked. You never really know people's stories just by looking at them. The observation landed heavily on Reynolds, a pointed echo of Quinn's own word from the previous evening. By mid-afternoon, Reynolds arrived at Quinn's house with Dobson and Eleanor. The street had been cleared of onlookers, though several houses now displayed American flags that hadn't been there the day before. Williams answered the door, his military bearing unmistakable despite his age and cane. Frank Dobson, he said, recognizing the VFW commander. Quinn said you'd be coming by. Inside, the living room had been transformed. Quinn's usual sparse furnishings now accommodated a small table covered with maps and photographs. Tran and Quinn sat reviewing documents, their heads bent together in conversation that stopped when the visitors entered. The town wants to honor you, Dobson announced without preamble. Nothing fancy, but something proper. Quinn looked uncomfortable. That's not necessary, Frank. Maybe not necessary, Eleanor said gently, but deserved, and perhaps overdue. Reynolds watched Quinn struggle with the attention, his natural inclination toward privacy, warring with the reality of his newly public status. What did you have in mind? He finally asked. Dobson outlined the town's desire for a simple ceremony, perhaps at the Veterans Memorial in the town square, with a small reception afterward at the VFW Hall. The whole town wants to be there, there?" Eleanor added. "People you've known for years, Mason. They want to show their respect." Quinn glanced at Williams, who nodded encouragingly. "It's time, brother. We kept the silence they asked for. Now let them say thank you." After a moment's consideration, Quinn nodded. "All right, but nothing extravagant." With the matter settled, they discussed logistics, the date, the format, who would speak. Quinn insisted on simplicity, refusing most of the ceremonial elements Dobson suggested. As the conversation continued, Reynolds noticed Quinn occasionally glancing toward his bedroom. Following his gaze, Reynolds spotted the wooden box from the mantel, now open on Quinn's dresser. Inside, something gleamed in the afternoon light, metals finally retrieved from decades of storage. When Dobson and Eleanor left to report back to the mayor, Reynolds lingered. "Is there anything you need, sir? Anything I can help with?" Quinn hesitated, then gestured toward the bedroom. "Actually, there is." He led Reynolds to the dresser, where the wooden box sat open. Inside lay several medals, ribbons, and a folded uniform that had maintained its crisp lines despite the years. "I haven't worn these since 1969, Quinn said, touching the medals gently. "Never thought I would again. They still look perfect," Reynolds observed. "I kept them ready," Quinn admitted. "Every year, I'd take them out, clean them, put them back. A ritual, I suppose, a reminder." He lifted the uniform jacket, the fabric still rich despite its age. "Williams is bringing his. Thought I should have mine ready, too." "It will fit?" Reynolds asked, noting Quinn's slender frame. The veteran smiled faintly. "We'll find out, though some things you never really outgrow." As Quinn carefully inspected each medal, each ribbon, Reynolds recognized the precise movements of a soldier preparing for inspection. Despite 50 years of civilian life, that part of Quinn had never disappeared, merely gone dormant, waiting for a moment like this. "Officer Reynolds," Quinn said suddenly, "would you mind being there at the ceremony?" Surprised by the request, Reynolds nodded. "Of course, sir. I'd be honored." "Good," Quinn said, returning the medals to their case. "It helps to have a friendly face in the crowd when your past and present collide." Night fell on Millfield, bringing with it an unusual stillness. The media vans had departed, curious neighbors had returned to their homes, and the government vehicles had withdrawn to the Millfield Inn. For the first time in 2 days, Mason, Quinn Street was quiet. Unable to sleep, Quinn sat in his darkened living room, a single lamp casting long shadows across the floor. The wooden box lay open on the coffee table, medals and ribbons arranged in precise military order. Beside them, photographs spread in chronological sequence, a visual timeline of Operation Stillwater and its aftermath. The soft knock at his back door was so quiet he almost missed it. Quinn moved with the caution of a man who had spent decades looking over his shoulder. Through the kitchen window he saw Michael Tran standing alone in the moonlight. "Couldn't sleep either?" Quinn asked as he opened the door. Tran shook his head. "Too many memories surfacing." They settled at the kitchen table, two men connected by a single day 50 years earlier. Quinn made tea, a habit he'd acquired during his time in Vietnam and never abandoned. "I've been trying to remember everything," Tran said, warming his hands around the mug. "That day, the sounds, the smells. I was so young." 8 years old, Quinn confirmed, scared but silent. "You never cried, not once during the entire extraction." "My father had prepared me," Tran explained. "He knew his cover might be compromised. He told me if anything happened, I must protect the tiger and stay quiet until the Americans with green. Barretts came." His voice softened. "He said they were the only ones I could trust." Quinn looked down at his own weathered hands. "We almost didn't find you. The bunker was well hidden. But Johnson heard me breathing," Tran remembered. "He always claimed he had supernatural hearing." "He did," Quinn smiled faintly. "Saved our lives more than once." A comfortable silence fell between them, two survivors sharing the weight of a Hainam shared history. "There's something I never told anyone," Quinn said finally. "Not Williams, not even Captain Reeves." Tran waited patiently as Quinn gathered his thought. "Before we found your village, we encountered a North Vietnamese patrol. 2 men. Standard procedure was to avoid engagement, maintain our cover." Quinn's eyes grew distant. "But they were heading toward your village. I made the call to neutralize them." "You had to," Tran said. Quinn shook his head. "That's just it. They weren't regular NVA. They were Chinese advisors, according to their papers. Taking them out violated about a dozen protocols. If that had been discovered during our debrief, but it wasn't. No. I buried that detail in my report. First time I ever falsified documentation." Quinn's jaw tightened. 3 hours later, we found your village being executed. Sometimes I wonder if I had followed protocol, let those advisors pass, would we have reached your village sooner? Could we have saved more people? Your father? The question had clearly haunted him for decades. Or they might have alerted the execution squad, and none of us would have survived, Tran countered gently. "You made the best decision you could with the information you had." Quinn nodded, though the absolute resolution didn't seem to reach his eyes. There was another moment after we got everyone out. Johnson wanted to go back, recover more evidence of what had happened. Documentation, photographs. Reeves ordered him to stand down, said our priority was getting the survivors to safety. He was right, Tran said. Yes, but Johnson never forgave. Himself thought if we'd had more evidence, the whole operation wouldn't have been buried. Quinn sighed. He drank himself to death by 83. Never got past it. Tran's expression grew solemn. Many ghosts from those days? Too many, Quinn agreed. The hardest part of the agreement wasn't the secrecy, it was not being able to check on the survivors, especially you children. He met Tran's gaze directly. Did they treat you well? After? Yes, Tran assured him. The Petersons, my adoptive family, were diplomatic corps. Kind, patient. They understood trauma, gave me space to heal. He smiled slightly. They even found a new tiger for me, though I kept the original hidden away. And the documents delivered to intelligence services by my adoptive father. He had the clearance. Tran hesitated. I didn't learn their full significance until I joined the State Department decades later. By then, most of the operation they revealed had been declassified, but the names, those remained sensitive. Names? Quinn asked. American officials collaborating with certain North Vietnamese commanders. A shadow war within the war. Tran's voice lowered. Some of those men went on to very powerful positions. Some are still alive. Quinn absorbed this. That's why the secrecy lasted so long. Yes. And why even now certain details remain classified. Tran reached into his jacket and removed a small worn object. A faded cloth tiger, crudely sewn from rice sack. I thought you might want to see this. It survived. Quinn took the stuffed animal with reverent hands. You kept it all these years. It reminded me that even in the darkest moments, good men exist. Tran's voice grew thick with emotion. Men who would risk everything to save a child they didn't know. As Quinn held the small tiger, memories washed over him. The weight of a terrified child in his arms, the sound of helicopter rotors, Johnson's voice urging them to hurry, Williams covering their retreat, Reeves arguing with the base commander, and later, the sterile room where Quinn had signed away his right to speak about any of it. There's one more thing, Tran said. Something not in any official record. He leaned forward. Do you remember what you said to me that day when you found me in the bunker? Quinn shook his head. It's been 50 years. You said, I see you, little tiger. You're safe now, in Vietnamese. Tran's eyes glistened. No American had ever spoken to me in my language before. It was how I knew I could trust you. The memory surfaced slowly. Quinn, crouching in the dark bunker, using the few phrases Nguyen had taught him, trying to coax a frightened child into safety. I'd forgotten that, Quinn admitted. I never did, Tran replied. Not for a single day. The Millfield Veterans Memorial stood at the center of the town square, a simple granite obelisk inscribed with the names of local men and women who had served in America's conflict. Normally, the space around it was quiet, occupied occasionally by solitary visitors paying respects or tourists reading the plaques, but today it seemed the entire town had gathered. Chairs had been arranged in neat rows facing a small podium. The American flag flew at full staff, snapping crisply in the Iowa spring breeze. Members of the local high school band, hastily assembled, stood ready with their instruments polished. Reynolds, in his dress uniform, watched from near the podium as people continued to arrive. Captain Brennan stood nearby, supervising the police. Presence, subtle but vigilant, given the high-profile nature of the event. At the perimeter, Reynolds spotted Mr. Clark and several men who moved with the unmistakable bearing of federal agents, their eyes constantly scanning the crowd. Quite a turnout, Davis remarked, joining Reynolds. Never seen the square this full, except for the 4th of July. Reynolds nodded. Quinn's going to hate it. Maybe, Davis conceded. But sometimes recognition isn't about what the recipient wants, it's about what everyone else needs to give. A murmur ran through the crowd as 3 black SUVs pulled up at the edge of the square. From the first emerged General Westfield and Colonel Harris in full-dress uniforms. From the second, Michael Tran and several officials Reynolds didn't recognize. And from the third, Mason Quinn and Eric Williams, 2 veterans of a classified war, finally stepping into the light. Quinn wore his dress uniform, the fabric still fitting his slender frame remarkably well after 50 years. The medals on his chest caught the morning sunlight, symbols of valor long hidden from public view. Beside him, Williams walked with his cane, his own uniform equally immaculate, his son supporting his elbow with quiet reverence. As they approached the memorial, the high school band began playing a dignified rendition of The Army Goes Rolling. Along, the crowd rose to their feet, a collective gesture of respect that seemed to momentarily overwhelm Quinn. He paused, his composure faltering for just an instant before Williams murmured something that straightened his shoulders. Mayor. Green welcomed them at the podium, escorting them to the seats of honor in the front row. Reynolds noticed Quinn scanning the crowd, perhaps seeking a familiar face amid the sea of people. When his eyes found Reynolds, the officer nodded in acknowledgement, receiving a slight nod in return. The ceremony began with the Pledge of Allegiance, led by a local scout troop. Then, Mayor Green approached the microphone. Citizens of Millfield, distinguished guests, we gather today to honor a man who has lived among us for decades, carrying silently the burden of extraordinary service. Her voice carried across the hushed square. Mason Quinn came to our town in 1972, seeking not recognition, but peace, a chance to build a quiet life after answering his nation's call in Vietnam. She outlined Quinn's service in carefully vetted terms: the 3 tours of duty, the special operations background, the recently declassified mission that had saved 23 civilians, including a boy who grew up to serve at the highest levels of government. Today we recognize not only Sergeant Quinn's military valor, but his half-century of quiet dignity as our neighbor, our colleague, our friend, she concluded. A man who carried his honor not as a banner, but as a compass. Colonel Harris spoke next, officially announcing the Presidential Unit Citation and Quinn's long-delayed Silver Star. He presented Quinn with formal documentation, explaining that the actual medals would be awarded at the White House the following month. Then, to Reynolds's surprise, Frank Dobson approached the microphone. Mason, he began, addressing Quinn directly, for 20 years, I invited you to join our VFW post. For 20 years, you politely declined. Now, I understand why. He gestured to several elderly veterans in the front row. We thought you didn't want to be part of our brotherhood. We never considered that you were honoring a promise, even at the cost of the camaraderie every veteran needs. Dobson's voice grew emotional. Today, the VFW Post 4731 of Millfield would like to present you with an honorary lifetime membership, not because of what you did in Vietnam, though God knows that deserves recognition, but because of how you've lived every day since, with honor, with integrity, with the quiet strength that defines the very best of those who serve. He presented Quinn with a VFW cap and membership card. The elderly veteran accepted them with visible emotion, his normally stoic expression softening, as he shook Dobson's hand. When it was Quinn's turn to speak, he approached the podium slowly, his eyes taking in the gathered crowd, neighbors, colleagues, strangers, all united in their desire to honor him. For a moment, he stood silently, perhaps gathering thoughts he'd never expected to share publicly. I'm not much for speeches, he began, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. For 50 years, I was asked to remain silent. About certain aspects of my service, I kept that promise, as did my brothers in arms. He nodded toward Williams, not for recognition, not for reward, but because we gave our word. Quinn paused, looking out at the sea of faces. What happened in Vietnam, what we did, what we saw, those are burdens soldiers carry home. But I found peace here in Millfield, in your kindness, your community, your simple acceptance of a man who revealed very little of himself. His gaze found Tyler from the convenience store, Eleanor Whitman, others who had been fixtures in his quiet life. You gave me a home when I needed one. For that, I am grateful. Quinn looked down at the documentation in his hands. This recognition comes late for many of my brothers. Johnson, Reeves, Guyon, they aren't here to see the truth finally acknowledged. But their families will know that what these men did mattered, that it wasn't forgotten. As he finished speaking, the high school band played a solemn rendition of Amazing Grace. Quinn returned to his seat beside Williams, who clasped his shoulder. In silent understanding, the formal ceremony concluded with a rifle salute by the VFW Honor Guard. As the last echoes faded, people rose to approach Quinn, to shake his hand, to thank him, to welcome this newly revealed hero back into their community as someone finally seen in full. Reynolds watched from a respectful distance as Quinn received their gratitude with the same quiet dignity he'd shown throughout his years in Millfield. The officer noticed how the veteran's posture had changed, as if the weight of secrecy, finally lifted, had allowed him to stand taller than he had in decades. 3 months after the ceremony in Millfield's town square, Officer James Reynolds sat at his desk in the police station, completing paperwork from his morning patrol. The rhythm of the small department had returned to normal after the excitement. Surrounded surrounding Mason Quinn's recognition. The media attention had faded, the government officials had departed, and life in Millfield had settled back into its familiar patterns. But some changes remained. Reynolds glanced at the bulletin board, where a newspaper clipping was prominently displayed: Quinn and Williams at the White House, receiving their long-delayed medals from the president. Beside it hung a photo from the local paper showing Quinn in his VFW cap, speaking to a group of high school students about service and sacrifice. "Reynolds," Captain Brennan called from his office doorway. "Got a minute?" Reynolds followed his superior into the small office, noting the formal tone. "Sir, take a seat." Brennan gestured to the chair across from his desk. "I've been reviewing your performance over the past quarter, particularly your community outreach initiatives." Reynolds nodded. After the Quinn recognition, he had proposed several new programs: a veteran outreach effort, a school presentation series on respecting the elderly, and a coffee with a cop event at Miller's Corner store. "Your veteran support program is impressive," Brennan continued, "connecting older vets with resources, checking on those living alone. The department's getting positive feedback from the community." "Thank you, sir. This represents a shift in your approach to policing," Brennan observed. "Your record was always solid, but recently you've shown more initiative, more community connection." He studied Reynolds. "Any particular reason for the change?" Reynolds considered the question. "I think the Quinn situation opened my eyes, sir, how we can miss what's right in front of us if we're not paying attention." Brennan nodded thoughtfully. "Well, whatever the reason, it's good work. I'm approving your request for the ride-along program with the senior center." He slid a folder across the desk. "And I'm recommending you for the community service commendation at next month's town council meeting." "I appreciate that, sir, but it's not necessary." "It's not about what's necessary, Reynolds," Brennan interrupted. "It's about recognizing good work when I see it. Something I think we all learned from Quinn's situation." After leaving the captain's office, Reynolds continued his shift with a new patrol route that included Sycamore Street. As he drove past Quinn's house, he noticed the veteran in his front yard showing a group of young officers something in a garden bed he'd recently planted. Reynolds pulled over, curious about the impromptu gathering. "Officer Reynolds," Quinn greeted him with a nod. "Perfect timing. I was just explaining to these recruits about perimeter awareness." The young officers, all recent graduates from the academy in Springfield, looked slightly confused as Quinn pointed out the specific arrangement of rose bushes along his fence line. "You can create natural surveillance points," the veteran was explaining, "without making it obvious. These roses require daily attention, which gives me a reason to check this sightline regularly without drawing attention." Reynolds suppressed a smile, recognizing that Quinn was teaching tactical awareness through the seemingly innocent medium of gardening. "Mr. Quinn's been giving us some pointers," one of the recruits explained, "things they don't teach at the academy." "Situational awareness never expires," Quinn said, straightening up with a slight wince, his age showing despite his still military posture. "The fundamentals remain the same, whether you're in the jungle or on Main Street." After the young officers departed, Reynolds helped Quinn gather his gardening tool. "You've become quite the mentor," he observed. Quinn shrugged. The young officers started showing up after the ceremony, asking questions, seeking advice. Seemed rude to send them away empty-handed. "They respect you," Reynolds said. "We all do. Respect is earned," Quinn replied, "not given. And it runs both ways." He studied Reynolds for a moment. "You look different, more settled." Reynolds considered this assessment. "I feel different, more purposeful, maybe." They walked toward Quinn's front porch, where two chairs now sat, a new addition since the ceremony. Quinn had begun to welcome visitors, a significant change for a man who had spent decades maintaining careful distance. "Captain Brennan mentioned your veteran outreach program," Quinn said, easing himself into one of the chairs. "Frank Dobson says it's making a real difference for some of the older vets who don't get many visitors." Reynolds sat in the other chair. "It's nothing special. Just checking in, making sure they have what they need." "That's where you're wrong," Quinn said firmly. "Sometimes being seen, truly seen, is exactly what people need most." He gestured toward his VFW cap hanging by the door. "After 50 years of shadows, I'm learning that myself." A comfortable silence fell between them. The veteran who had carried secrets for half a century and the young officer whose brief encounter with him had changed the trajectory of his career. "I've been thinking about something you said," Reynolds ventured finally, "the night after the convenience store incident, about everyone fighting battles we know nothing about." Quinn nodded. nodded. It's true of every person you meet. It's changed. How I approach my job, Reynolds admitted. I'm trying to look deeper, to see beyond the immediate situation. The shield we wear, whether it's a police badge or military insignia, it's not meant to separate us from those we protect, Quinn said. It's meant to connect us, to remind us of our responsibility toward them. Reynolds thought about the commendation. Brennan had mentioned how insignificant it seemed compared to the lessons he'd learned from this elderly veteran who had been invisible in their community for so long. I owe you an apology, Quinn said suddenly. Reynolds looked up in surprise. For what? For underestimating you. That day at the store, I dismissed you as just another young man with a badge and no understanding. Quinn's weathered face creased in a smile. I was as guilty of misperception as you were. I'd say we're even then, Reynolds replied. As he prepared to continue his patrol, Reynolds noticed a new photograph on Quinn's side table. The veteran with Williams and Tran at the White House ceremony, standing tall in their dress uniforms, their long-delayed medals finally in place. The president asked me to stay on after the ceremony, Quinn said, following Reynolds' gaze. Wanted to hear the full story directly. Listened for over an hour. His expression softened. 50 years of silence, and suddenly, the most powerful man in the country wants to hear what I have to say. Your voice was always valuable, Reynolds said. The rest of us just weren't listening. 1 year to the day after the encounter at Miller's Corner Store, Officer James Reynolds pushed open the glass door of the convenience store, the familiar bell jingling overhead. The interior hadn't changed. Same fluorescent lighting, same cramped aisles, same coffee station in the corner. Tyler still worked behind the counter, now sporting a military-style haircut that he'd adopted shortly after Quinn's recognition ceremony. Officer Reynolds, Tyler greeted him. The usual? Reynolds nodded. And whatever he's having, he added, gesturing toward the elderly man waiting patiently at the coffee station. The man turned at the sound of Reynolds' voice, revealing a weathered face beneath a Veterans of Foreign Wars cap. Not Quinn. This veteran was a stranger, his hands trembling slightly as he tried to manage both a cane and a cup of coffee. Let me help you with that, sir, Reynolds offered, stepping forward. The man looked up, momentary wariness giving way to gratitude. Appreciate it. These old hands don't cooperate like they used to. Reynolds helped him prepare his coffee, then escorted him to the register. I've got this one, Tyler. As Reynolds paid for both coffees, he noticed the veteran studying his uniform. Millfield Police, the man read, just moved here last month. Seems like a good town. It is, Reynolds confirmed, especially for veterans. We have an active VFW post, good support services. The man nodded. My daughter convinced me to move closer to her family after my wife passed, he trailed off. Starting over at 73. Never thought I'd be doing that. Change can be tough at any age, Reynolds acknowledged, but Millfield has a way of growing on you. They stepped outside into the bright morning sunlight. The veteran squinted, then froze, his attention caught by something across the street. Reynolds followed his gaze to where Mason Quinn stood waiting at the crosswalk, a VFW folder tucked under his arm. Is that, the veteran began? Mason Quinn, Reynolds confirmed. You recognize him? From the news, the Operation Stillwater recognition. The man shook his head in wonder. Never thought I'd run into him in person. The crosswalk light changed, and Quinn made his way across the street with the deliberate gait of a man who had learned that some journeys couldn't be rushed. When he reached them, his eyes registered first Reynolds, then the veteran with the cane. Morning, officer, Quinn greeted Reynolds, then turned to the other man. Vietnam? The veteran straightened slightly. 1st Cavalry Division, 68 to 70. Quinn nodded. 5th Special Forces Group. No further explanation was needed. The two men regarded each other with the quiet recognition that only comes from shared experience, an unspoken understanding of things most civilians would never comprehend. Just moved to Millfield, Reynolds explained. I was about to mention, the VFW meets on Thursdays, 1900 hours, Quinn confirmed. I can introduce you around if you'd like. Good group of men and women. The veteran hesitated. Been a while since I've done anything like that, kept to myself mostly, after coming home. Something in his tone resonated with Quinn, who studied him more carefully. We all find our own way to carry it, he said, but sometimes it gets lighter when you set it down among friends. A moment of understanding passed between them. Two men who had carried the weight of war home and found different ways to bear it, one in silence and solitude, the other perhaps in something equally isolating. James Reynolds, Reynolds introduced, himself extending his hand to the newcomer. Paul Mercer, the veteran replied, shifting his cane to accept the handshake handshake. "Mr. Mercer is staying with his daughter on Oakwood," Reynolds explained to Quinn. "The blue house with the maple trees." Quinn nodded. "3 blocks from me. Good neighborhood." He turned to Mercer. "If you need anything before Thursday, I'm at 1423 Sycamore. White House, red door." Mercer seemed surprised by the offer. "Appreciate that." As they parted ways, Reynolds to his patrol car, Mercer toward the residential streets, Quinn to his VFW meeting. Reynolds caught the older veteran watching Quinn with a contemplative expression. "He's different than I expected," Mercer remarked. "More approachable." Reynolds smiled. "A year ago, he'd have walked right past us, kept to himself. For decades," he glanced at Quinn's retreating figure. "Things change. People, too, sometimes. And sometimes it's how we see them that changes," Mercer observed shrewdly. Reynolds considered this as he returned to his patrol car. A year ago, he'd seen an old man fumbling with coins. Nothing more, nothing less. He'd missed the soldier beneath the age, the hero beneath the ordinary exterior. As he drove through the familiar streets of Millfield, Reynolds passed the Veterans Memorial, where Quinn had finally been recognized. Fresh flowers had been placed at its base, a regular occurrence since the ceremony. The town had not forgotten the lesson of Mason Quinn. His patrol route took him past the high school, where Quinn now occasionally spoke to history classes about Vietnam, not the classified operations, but the human experience of serving in a complex and often misunderstood conflict. Through the windows, Reynolds could see students leaning forward in their seats, engaged by the first-hand account of history that textbooks could never capture. Later that afternoon, as his shift neared its end, Reynolds drove past Miller's Corner store once more. Through the window, he glimpsed a surprising tableau: Quinn and Mercer sitting at the small table in the corner, coffee cups between them, deep in conversation. Two veterans bridging the gap of decades of silence, finding common ground in shared experience. Tyler caught Reynolds' eye through the window and gave a thumbs up. Reynolds returned the gesture, understanding its significance. The cycle was continuing. Quinn, once isolated by secrecy and obligation, now extending the same recognition and respect to another veteran who had walked a solitary path. As Reynolds completed his patrol, he reflected on the changes of the past year. In Quinn, in himself, in the community that had learned to look beyond appearances. The convenience store incident that had begun as a moment of disrespect had ultimately revealed a deeper truth, that heroes often walk among us unrecognized, their greatest acts of courage hidden beneath ordinary exteriors. The shield that Reynolds wore, his badge, his uniform, now represented something more profound to him than authority. It represented responsibility to see people truly, to recognize their dignity regardless of their struggles, to remember that every person carries unseen battles and untold stories. In the end, perhaps that was Mason Quinn's greatest legacy. To Millfield, not the medals or the classified mission, but the simple reminder that valor and honor exist in quiet moments of choice, in small acts of recognition, in seeing beyond appearances to the truth that lies within.